Welcome to the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig. William, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Well, I'm very glad to have one of the most enthusiastic Ayn Rand fans I've heard of recently, Michael Liebowitz. So I found out about Michael when he was recently involved with having various objectivist intellectuals on with Todd Feinburg, a very popular radio host on WTIC in Connecticut. Came to find he's just out of prison where he was for the last 25 years. While there, he wrote Down the Rabbit Hole about failures in the prison system. So I'm fascinated to hear your story. Michael, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm eager to tell my story.
Good. And I do want to talk a lot about Rand and your recent efforts to promote her ideas, but I just think anyone hears prison, there's a natural first question, what were you in for? So tell us a little about your early life, how you ended up in prison, and where in all this Ayn Rand comes into the picture.
Okay, so I was raised by a single mother who was also a heroin addict. My father was in and out of my life as a kid. He was a heroin addict and an alcoholic. And early on, I was attracted to the troublemakers in the neighborhood, the kids that wanted to commit crimes, vandalize property, steal, whatever. Why I was attracted to it, I don't know. People always say, well, what caused you? And I have no idea. I just know that's what I would like. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be tough. I wanted to be cool. And that's what I thought was cool. So you flash forward when I was 20, 21 years old, I was dating a girl and she had various guy friends and I couldn't handle it. I was jealous, I was possessive, and I was violent. And it ultimately culminated in my having her boyfriend stabbed while he was asleep. I engaged 3 of my friends to break in the house, and that's what they did. They beat him up and they stabbed him. Now, I've got a lot of other charges as well, but I think that would bore the audience to hear about all of them. And that is the primary charge for which I did the bulk of my time.
Wow. So this is what, 1998 you're going in?
1997.
Okay. And so what, that's the birth of the internet. I'm curious about some of the stories about prison life, the stereotypes. I mean, are you like, do you have to join some sort of race-based gang to survive?
No, you do not. I've only been in prison in Connecticut, so I don't know about anywhere else, but prison in Connecticut is nothing like the stereotypes that you see on television. It, in large part, is just very boring and very noisy.
Okay, you don't have to like have a fight to prove yourself or
No, and thank God you don't, because I'd have been in a bad way if that were the case.
Now, so what are these first years in prison like? You've just been involved with this and
Well,
what?
initially, I was, seeking to get back out for one thing, but also to escape the boredom, escape myself. And now I had used drugs and alcohol on the street to escape myself. And I thought, why not do the same in prisons? So I employed various means in order to get high. And what that meant was I would have my mother, who was a heroin addict, as I said before, who had done time before and knew how the system worked. So I had her smuggle me in heroin. And I did that for a few years. I quit. Then I picked up on it again. And then ultimately in 2004, decided enough was enough and turned my life around.
And so what do you credit the turning around to?
Well, it starts with desire, and where desire comes from, I don't know. But I had a desire to learn. So I devoured literature, everything I could. And not insignificantly, I read Atlas Shrugged and I read The Virtue of Selfishness. And even while I was getting drugged, getting high on drugs, that was sort of the ethical ideal that I wanted to aim at, was the rational self-interest. And it became clear to me that I wasn't living as an egoist. So I ultimately gave up the drugs and turned it around.
That's great. Now, you say there was another book, Inside the Criminal Mind, that had a big influence on you as well?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's a lot of books that had an influence on me. Inside the Criminal Mind. If I had to name three, I would say Inside the Criminal Mind, Atlas Shrugged, and Nathaniel Branden's book, The Psychology of Self-Esteem, were the
Sure.
main sources of my transformation. But there's a lot of others. But Inside the Criminal Mind was written by a guy named Dr. Stanton Samanow, and it was basically a distilled version with some updates from an earlier work by Dr. Samanow and Dr. Yokelson. They did I believe it was a 15-year study where they studied how criminals think, how they behave, and they wrote a 3-volume set called The Criminal Personality. And when I initially read Inside the Criminal Mind, it was as if I was reading a blueprint to the way that I thought. It was just pinpoint accuracy into criminal thinking, both my own and that of the other criminals that I was around and had grown up around.
And you think that seeing that someone had pegged you, was that maybe part of the impetus to change? Or
Well, no, because I already was desiring change to some extent, or I wouldn't have read the book to begin with. But the fact that he was able to peg me, as you said, led me to think, well, maybe this guy knows what he's doing when it comes to rehabilitation too. And the similarity amongst the three books that I measured with Ayn Rand, Nathaniel Branden, and Dr. Samanow is all three of them insisted on total integrity, that a person, you can't allow flaws to just fester and stay in yourself. You actually have to correct them. You have to be committed to moral perfection. And I know that that's not a popular concept, but nonetheless, aiming toward it has always been a big help for me.
sure.
Are you worried? Are you worried that not recognizing the cause of your issues will manifest in them reappearing, like the consequences reappearing?
Say that again?
So you said that you don't understand why you got involved in troublemakers early on in your life, and
No, 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 no. No. Not that I don't know why I know why I got involved. I don't know why I wanted to. Ultimately, a human being's desires are primaries. I mean, when you go back, I'm talking about to a child. As you get into an adult, obviously your volition and values come into play. But as a 4 and a 5-year-old, I mean, you want ice cream. What flavor ice cream? Maybe chocolate. Why? I don't know. And it's the same sort of thing. To ask why a 4 or 5-year-old is interested in breaking the rules, it's just, I don't think there's an answer to it. But the reason I mean, I can tell you why. For instance, I wanted to be a tough guy. My father was a tough guy. I wanted to be just like him. But then you can always go back and say, well, why did you want to be just like your father? I mean, you can, through an infinite regress, just keep going back and back. Why? And to that, I ultimately don't know. I know that I was in control of my behavior, and I know I made the choices.
yeah, I mean, we agree there. I think that there is a biological root somewhere. I mean, there is an answer, but it might be very hard to figure that out, especially, when you're dealing with an individual who has individual values and choices and concerns and maybe psychological issues themselves. So I'm wondering,
Well,
do
can
you think
I,
it could have?
may I interrupt for 1 second? Because
Sure, go ahead.
there's a risk here of falling for the fallacy of determinism. And because once you say, well, what caused me to do that, you're assuming it's something outside myself or something inside myself that I'm not in control of that's making me do something. And that's just a dangerous idea in general and for criminals in particular, because once you tell a criminal, well, you're not responsible, something else made you do it, well, then all bets are off and it's deuce is wild. And I don't want to give that impression to anybody. So, I mean, ultimately, I made choices. We all do. And especially as I began to get older, as we become more and more in tune with ourselves and more aware of what we're doing, the decisions become more and more conscious and more volitional. So I
Right.
really want to, I can't stress how much I want to disavow the whole idea of determinism in any variety it comes in, whether that be social or biological.
Right. I agree with a lot of that. I do think that, we are animals. We do have a biological system and we have a pleasure pain mechanism. And it's very hard at some degrees of choice making to overrun or override that pleasure pain mechanism. And so it might be hard for you to break out of a habit you've formed for pursuing a certain pleasure or certain attention getting or something like that. And it takes a real monumental effort of free will to overcome that.
I agree with that. It definitely takes effort. But for instance, you use the pleasure pain mechanism, but the pleasure pain mechanism, it isn't immediate. So it's not as if, well, this gives me pleasure, therefore it's good, or this gives me pain, therefore it's bad. Oftentimes, for instance, in the case, take heroin, heroin's very pleasurable. But if you pay attention to the long-term consequences, then you see that the pain far outweighs the pleasure. So it's often just a matter of taking a long-range view and not looking at the immediate results of a given conduct.
Yeah, I agree with that. Also, regarding your motivations, you once on Twitter, I read you said, I once lived to impress and control others. I thought nothing of their rights. Some
Yes.
say this was selfish. It cost me 25 years of my life. That hardly seems selfish to me. I thought that's part of this long range thinking. You know, if you as a young man had known that your crime would have resulted in 25 years in prison, you probably wouldn't have sent those friends to the house, and your life would be completely different.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, most, if not all, criminals have a fool's notion of self-interest. It's immediate gratification. This is what I want now, therefore I should have it. So they pursue that road. But the road is often, if not always, self-destructive. And that was kind of my point. It's true that I was trying to act in my own interest when I was free, but it's pretty obvious to me, and I think anybody that will think about it, that I wasn't actually acting in my own interest. To act in one's own interest, the person first has to actually know what is in his or her own interest. And I clearly didn't.
Sure.
Yeah.
Just switching gears a little bit, do you is there access to some sort of email or internet, or did that come, slower than the rest of the general population?
In the last, I think 2 or 3 years, they've started introducing tablets in the Connecticut prison system. As far as I know, only one prison, McDougal, was allowed email, though. And even that isn't email like I can email you right now and you respond. I believe people have to get on your list, and there's a whole process, but I wasn't there at the time. So I'm taking this on the word of inmates, which is never a smart thing to do.
So, all right. So you have an epiphany through Rand, through Salmanow, and others, Brandon. And so you still have another, almost 19 years or something?
Well, at the time, it was actually more than that because I initially had a 33-year sentence. So my release date was in 2030 and my parole date was 2025. So I had in 2004, I had at least 21 years to parole as far as I knew. Now, subsequently, they introduced good time credits and I was able to get 5 years taken off of my sentence. So that got me out earlier than I otherwise would have. But in 2004, I didn't know that that was going to be the case, although I certainly was working for it and hoping for it.
Right. And but you were able to at some point hook up with, for example, Todd Feinburg. Can you tell us a little about that story?
Well, sure. So when Brett McCall and I released the book Down the Rabbit Hole, How the Culture of Corrections Encourages Crime, which he was the senior author, I was more of a helper. I mean, I certainly put in a lot of effort on it, but I don't want to minimize his contribution because he put in a Herculean effort on the book. So, but through that, we were able to get in touch with Senator Len Suzio, who was a senator at that time and was very critical of the risk reduction or credit law, the good time law that I referenced earlier. That was one of the things that we criticized in our book. So we got him a book and he became very interested and came to visit us. And even once he lost election, was no longer in office, he was still trying to help me. And one of the people that he was in contact with was Todd Feinburg. So he reached out to Todd, and Todd ultimately decided to have me on the phone. Have me on the show to discuss the book. And after our first interview, he asked me if I was interested in being a regular on the show.
That's great. And so what is your role? I mean, you're quasi booker or producer or talent or just whatever they need?
I'm a guest. I'm a regular guest on the show, and I help out to promote the things that I think are important in life. For
Sure.
instance, the philosophy of Ayn Rand, Austrian economics, reforming the criminal justice system.
Was he already into some of this stuff before he met you?
Todd has always been a fan of Ayn Rand.
Okay.
And he's always been a capitalist. The prison reform, I think that he, from me, probably learned a lot more about it than what he thought initially, but you'd ultimately have to ask him. I believe I've opened his eyes to a lot about the criminal justice system, but I'm not certain of that.
What about that? I mean, thoughts on, I mean, can anyone be redeemed? Should we just, some of this criminal justice reform is just kind of letting everyone out, and that's the goal of some of these progressive groups.
Yeah, that's not reform, that's stupidity. So no, I don't believe anybody can be redeemed, me included, because to say that implies that somebody else is doing the redeeming, and ultimately it's on the individual to redeem himself. Now, you can, however, just like in society, I believe that people are responsible for their behavior, but you can create environments that are more or less conducive to flourishing, to well-being, to change in the case of criminals. And the prison system just doesn't do that. And it's for a variety of reasons. So while I still think it's on the offender in the final analysis, the fact that you have inconsistent rules that are inconsistently followed, that you have correctional officers setting a bad example by, for instance, sleeping on the job or talking about having sex with the female correctional officers, or that inmates are allowed to run wild most of the time unless the correctional officer happens to not like them, and then that correctional officer will write them a disciplinary report. So when you have that type of environment, it makes it very difficult, especially when you're already screwed up to begin with. It makes it very difficult to do the kind of work that's going to help to become a better person.
Do you think
Sure.
at some level the correctional officers don't have the tools or the free ability to do what they think needs done in order to correct the criminals? Because in the old days, it seems like the guards could just have free reign to beat up inmates if they weren't doing what they were told to do and things like that. Do you think at some level people just need to be beaten?
No, I don't think that beating is ever a good idea, whether it be with animals or people. But I don't know how it used to be. I know that the recidivist rates stay relatively the same. I know that a lot of prisoners and COs glorify the old days, but they do it from a different perspective. The COs will talk about how back in the day they could beat up the inmates, and the inmates say back in the day they can beat up the COs. I'm inclined to think it's just a lot of bad memory. But whether, I don't believe that they're equipped, no, to help offenders change, but I also don't think that they really have the desire to do so. Ultimately, you're talking about a system where they're protected by a very powerful union. So if I were to tell you, okay, you're going to have a system where the employees are going to be protected by a very powerful union, everything they do is going to take place literally behind closed doors, and the only people that are ever going to complain about it are going to be the people that nobody cares about anyway. It's a recipe for disaster. It doesn't take a Sherlock Holmes to figure that out.
In a nutshell, can you tell us what you think needs to happen?
Yeah, I think the prison system needs to be run like a private business, whereby they get rewarded or remunerated based on results. That's how every other business is operated. If you're selling hamburgers, you know that you're going to sell more hamburgers if you produce a quality burger, or maybe you produce it in a faster time or more convenience, whatever. Maybe the restaurant's a better place, but ultimately you have to serve the customer and you have a goal. And then if you meet that goal, usually you'll be remunerated. With the Department of Corrections, everybody every state agency really, they get paid regardless of results. So if you're going to pay somebody regardless of results and you're not going to fire them regardless of bad behavior, what are you going to get? You're going to get what we have. Whereas if they were going to be paid based on reductions in recidivism, or if inmates got out and had a higher percentage of employment, things of that nature, I think it'd be a completely different system.
Are there private prisons now, and are there examples of this working?
Well, the problem is in America, we do have private prisons, but the private prisons in America aren't run like any business I've ever heard of. They get paid based on the amount of people they house in their prisons. So if you're getting paid based on the amount of people that are taking up space in your building, then your incentive is to keep them in that building. It's not to make sure nobody comes back to it. Now, there is a corporation that I know a little bit about, but I haven't studied in depth, called Serco. It operates out of the United Kingdom. They have prisons in Australia, New Zealand, and I think in Britain. But they give bonuses based on reductions in recidivism. And from what I've read, there's been some success. Of course, I've seen things that have talked about corruption and whatnot. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know to the extent to which they're privatized, but I think in most cases, perhaps in all, that when it's the government doing things, you're going to get a worse result than if the government wasn't doing them.
Guess what? My main concern is, what can private prisons do better that the government prisons can't do? Like, what is going to be the actual systematic change that will result in a decrease in recidivism?
Okay, well, if the three of us are all correctional officers in a private prison and we know that we're getting paid based on results and you're sleeping in a closet somewhere, then the other two of us are going to have an incentive to go wake you up or to report you because you're now affecting our bottom line. So there's one way. Whereas now nobody cares. They just stick up for each other, cover for one another, and protect each other.
So
So
basic
so there's
enforcement of the
yeah,
regulation.
yeah, you're going to have officers that are going to be setting a better example. Rule enforcement would be more consistent. The rules would make more sense because everybody would be focused on getting the job done correctly. So you'd have more creative ways. Furthermore, there's evidence-based programs out there that have been shown to work if implemented properly. That means they have to have a proper philosophy, and on top of the philosophy, it has to be implemented according to that philosophy. It's called program integrity. So right now what you have, or therapeutic integrity, I'm sorry. Right now what you have is most of the programs aren't evidence-based, and even those that aren't implemented properly because nobody's incentivized to do so.
I see.
I'd like to, just within your time in prison and being around, what are considered the worst people in society, just maybe broad thoughts about human nature that you derived.
I don't think that people are either good or bad. I think that people are a function of their decisions. Some people face tougher decisions than others. I don't believe that outside of brainwashing or a situation where somebody's maybe tortured. I think that your average person has the opportunity in this world to flourish. And I don't think that the people in prison are inherently bad. I think that they're capable of redeeming themselves by and large. I mean, I'm sure there's some that are so far gone that nothing could ever be done. But for the most part, I think people can change. I think people can make better decisions in their lives and become better people. I think it takes a monumental amount of effort, and that you have to be willing to put forth that effort, but it can nonetheless be done.
Can you ballpark the percentage of prisoners that turn things around?
uh, I know of two others for sure, and maybe a handful of others that have also done it, but I'm not so sure. And that's out of thousands that I've known. I've known a lot of people that have been able to fool others into thinking that they're changed, but if you pay attention to their behavior on a daily basis, you quickly see that it's not actually the case.
Okay.
Is there a common denominator among these handful of people who have changed that you've recognized? Something that works?
First and foremost, a willingness to read.
Education.
Yeah, well, not just education. I mean, I know plenty of prisoners who are well versed in, the history or science, but specifically willing to read about stuff that's going to challenge their thinking and show them a better way to think and a better way to live. For instance, the doctors, Samanow and Yokelson, identified a thinking error that they called concrete thinking. And it reminds me of, Ayn Rand calls it the concrete mentality, or the concrete bound mentality. It's where there's not a thinking in principle, and criminals have not learned to think in principle. So if you want them to be educated, if you want them to change, they have to be able to learn to think in principle, to know that a behavior is wrong in this set of circumstances, that set of circumstances, and every set of circumstances, to identify fundamentally what's wrong with the behavior, why it's wrong, and why it's in their interest to not engage in it.
That kind of gets me back to the pleasure pain principle, because hedonists will seek pleasure even at the cost of long-term failures, or problems. They will just gamble all their money away, or they'll drink to excess and kill themselves. I think pleasure seeking can be a nasty habit if you take it to a real extreme. And do you think that's a common problem among criminals?
Well, I think that everybody seeks pleasure. I think the problem with the criminals is that they seek it immediately and at the expense of everything else because they don't recognize what's coming down the pike. What they see is this is what I want it now, and I'm going to get it. Whereas somebody else might say, well, you know what? I see this guy, I could rob him for his watch, but if I do that, yeah, I might get away and get, 10 grand for the Rolex. But I also face a very real chance of ending up in prison. This guy might have a gun on him. There's a anonymity of things that could go wrong. Criminals tend not to do that. They isolate the immediate, focus on it, and seek to get it regardless of the costs, largely because they don't see the long range costs.
We talk about the high recidivism rate. Do you think that's the same case for people who've already gone to prison for their crimes? Do you think they still don't recognize after they get out of prison that if they commit crimes, they're going to go to prison?
I don't. I think that they might believe that eventually they will, but not for each crime. So I might know, okay, if I engage in these robberies over a 5-year period, chances are I'm going to get caught. But for this robbery right here, I'm going to get away with it. The doctors identified it as super optimism, where the criminal believes he'll get away with anything. And that's partly fueled by the fact that criminals have gotten away with the vast majority of crimes that they've committed. So the evidence shows them that they're likely to get away with it. What they don't grasp is that it only takes this one time, and that can really leave a mark, to say the least.
They think they're smarter. They're smarter than their victims.
Oh, yeah. And smarter than their victims, smarter than the cops, smarter than everybody.
Yeah. Did you have some Rip Van Winkle moments getting out after 25 years with how things were different?
No, I actually no. I mean, we have television in prison and radio and books and magazines, so I knew what was going on. The one thing that was kind of really demonstrated to me just how bad it was the inflation. Although I knew it was taking place and obviously had seen it on the news, to really experience it, to go into a McDonald's and to feed 3 people, you're spending $30-something. I mean, that was crazy to me. But other than that, no, it wasn't really a Rip Van Winkle moment for me.
No, people on the outside have experienced that too in the last year or so.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a little bit about Ayn Rand, her influence on you, you making efforts to promote her ideas. Now, where do you just kind of your thoughts on the culture and where things are and what's next, what your efforts are towards right now?
Well, I think Ayn Rand was an absolutely brilliant woman. She has a complete philosophy, and while normally the political aspects of her philosophy are what's emphasized, fundamentally, as she said, she was an advocate of reason. And I personally believe, and I think with an abundance of evidence, that if people would be reasonable, if they would employ logic in their lives, we'd have a much better world. And so by adopting that principle of reason and learning how to think critically and think logically and understanding the rules of thought has helped me to assess, analyze everything else that's come across, including Ayn Rand's philosophy in the areas where I think that it's flawed or I think she's mistaken. But starting with reason and then moving on to a rational moral code that I think is demonstrably true based on the what's the word I'm looking for? The genetic root of the word value. I think it's a phenomenal achievement on her part. So, I mean, epistemology, logic, politics, right down the line, I think she was just phenomenal. And by the way, you very rarely hear anybody that states her views accurately and then attempts to refute them. Either they misstate her views or they just attack her personally. And her personal life really doesn't interest me at all. It's her ideas that influence me. Or interest me, rather, excuse me.
That's good. Not everyone in the movement shares that view. Even, there's some people that are shy about reading Brandon because of things that happened in the past. when I actually took sessions from him in the 90s, a couple, and I mean, yeah, Psychology of Self-Esteem is a classic. The principle of playing with his dog and getting that experience, and
Mutnick.
yeah, exactly. But there are people out of a misguided loyalty to Rand. They won't read any of his post-Rand work, and I think that happens. And I was amazed to see, because you have kind of brought people from all over the movement, from the different branches, onto Todd's show. There was Tal Tsfany from ARI. There was Richard Salsman and Robert Tracinski from Atlas Society. So I think that's fantastic and great. I just I'm slightly concerned someone's going to try to come to you and say, oh, you're supposed to hate this and that person if you want to, prove your there's almost this, there's a social hierarchy aspect of it that's not completely unlike prison.
Yeah, I neither ask for nor take loyalty oaths to anybody but the supremacy of my own mind. I'm not looking to join a movement that's going to require blind loyalty. That's not my thing. And neither do I think her ideas warrant such a behavior. I mean, after all, she herself didn't purge Nathaniel Branden from the writings that he did as part of her movement. Virtuous Selfishness, Capitalism, The Unknown Ideal, he's all throughout them. Although there's the disclaimer at the beginning, nonetheless, he's still in there.
Right. And those works are considered to be part of objectivism. Those essays that make up some of the nonfiction books, or just that was in the Objectivist pre-1968.
If I can jump in real quick.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I was introduced to Ayn Rand in college in the 90s. And for a while, I thought, everything she said was genius, and a lot of it was. And I became an objectivist. And then over the years, I kind of started developing a curiosity about certain things she said, and I developed a couple disagreements. And so I found it fascinating that you said on Twitter, quote, "I believe it's far more beneficial to be challenged rather than echoed." And so I'm wondering, what have you challenged in objectivism, and what are your disagreements?
Okay, well, let me just explain the statement first. Is that in order to correct myself, I'd need somebody to tell me I'm doing wrong, because otherwise I might just be unaware of it. So that's what I mean by that. Like, if someone just always tells me I'm right, I'm doing a great job, then there's really no room for improvement. So I can, right off the bat, I can tell you that I disagree with her definition of value. She defines value. She states unequivocally that value is an objective term, but then defines value as anything you seek to gain or keep. Well, if value is anything I seek to gain and or keep, then it's a subjective term. So right there, I find a problem. I don't think it's that big of a problem, because if you go and you research the word value, and you find it's any object or quality desirable as a mean or end in itself. So then you have to say, well, what's desirable? It means worth pursuing. So what is worth pursuing? And then you can get into her whole notion that the only thing that, first of all, the only entities that can pursue are living entities, and living entities are the only things that can take actions to either benefit or harm themselves, i.e., that can pursue things that are worth pursuing. But
Yeah,
her definition, I think, is misguided, to say the least. I think what happens is there's a confusion over multiple uses of the word value. There's what I value, and there's what is of value to me, and the two aren't always aligned.
Well, Peikoff addressed this in one of his lectures. I forget which one it was, but if you notice in her essay, in Ayn Rand's essay on virtue of selfishness, I believe she started with a more biological definition of value, which is what you were talking about, where it encompasses all pursuits of things that you want. But then she narrowed it down and created a second definition, which is pertaining to objectivist values. So I think what you're looking at is two different definitions that she was using. And
I'm unaware of the second definition that you're referring to. I've read the Objectivist Ethics front and back and read the cover off of the Virtuous Selfishness, and I don't believe she has another definition. If I'm
Well,
mistaken, I'm certainly willing to be corrected, but I don't think that's the case.
yeah, I'll give you a page citation at
Okay.
some point.
She
But
uses now let me just say, she uses the word value certainly differently from the definition she employs. And I once had a debate with somebody who told me, yes, but a concept entails everything included in the concept. The concept isn't its definition. The problem is, according to Randian epistemology, you have to follow the rule of fundamentality. What fundamentally differentiates a concept from all else? And what fundamentally differentiates the concept of objective value isn't that it's sought and pursued, because things are sought and pursued that don't have objective value. What fundamentally differentiate it is that it's good for the entity that pursues it.
I
yeah,
think
that would be,
I was going to say,
yeah,
I think it's an important point, and I think that the misunderstanding between subjective and objective value plays a role in how so many objectivists started taking Rand's personal preferences as like the ideal. So many of them would smoke or listen to Rachmaninoff or tiddlywink music, and it's just like, yeah, those aren't objective values. Those are, they may be values to that person because of their, whatever personal thing
Yeah.
makes them that way, but they're not, that's not the same as the objective values that we all need to live.
Well, Rand was once asked, what would an objectivist find humorous? And her answer was, how the hell would I know? Which illustrates to me that she understood that it wasn't her personal preferences that mattered. Although, maybe she acted like that in her private life. I ultimately don't know, because I've seen such discrepancies in descriptions of how she conducted herself. And again, I really don't care about that. I care about the philosophy and how much it's helped me and what I think it could do for this country and the world.
That's the
yeah.
spirit.
I think that Rand was at a certain level of thinking, I believe, where she didn't always understand what other people needed spelled out. So she would use a definition. She would use a word in two different ways because it was obvious to her that she was using it in two different ways. But maybe to other people, they didn't follow that line of thinking because she didn't spell it out for them. I think that's a problem with a lot of very smart people, is that they get in their own head too much and aren't focused on what other people are grasping.
Well, maybe so, but as somebody with, what's the word I'm looking for here, with such a commitment to precision in language, she ought to have known better than that. And perhaps she did. I ultimately don't know. I don't know that she knew she was doing it or not, but I know that there's the case with the word value, that it's defined in such a way that doesn't support her ultimate conclusions.
And that's, part of why we use Ayn Rand fans, because we're fans overall of her essentials and fundamentals, but it doesn't mean we have to agree with each and everything. But for you, I'm just curious, you talked about Ayn Rand having an impact in the culture. I think you're looking at it with a fresh set of eyes somewhat. Talk about how, where is it you want to see things go from here? Continuing to get Ayn Rand more exposure on radio and TV and social media.
Well, yeah, I mean, I want to share her ideas. I want more people to be exposed to them, ultimately, because I want to live in a type of place that's governed by basically reason. I mean, if you just did that, everything else falls into place. But first, we have to have a commitment to reason, and we just don't have that nowadays, as is evidenced by our politics, where it's all about, what Todd calls Yankee suck syndrome. If you're on my team, you can do no wrong. If you're on the other team, you can do no right. You have people that talk about how the Republicans are for freedom and how they're constitutionalists, when it's patently clear that that's not the case.
I can appreciate that. I do also think there is a type of not just liberty movement, but an attempt to say, well, I'm just going to always call both sides equally bad, and that means I never have to commit.
Well, that would be the two sides of the same error. I mean, it's just the refusal to actually think about it. It's a predetermined conclusion. which is the same thing as saying my side can do no wrong, the other side can do no right. It's no different than saying neither side can do right.
Absolutely. I just sometimes people do it as a type of almost virtue signal. It's like, both sides mentality can be a tribe too if you're not careful.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
On
You're correct.
Twitter, you were saying that people are deceived into believing the Republicans are for capitalism.
Yes.
Do you think that the Republicans are a little better than the Democrats though? Because that's kind of my
No, I
position.
think they're worse.
Yeah, that seems to be the dominant position in objectivism. But I think that the Republicans have one thing going for them. First, they say that they're for liberty and capitalism, and two, they aren't completely against Ayn Rand. For example, you got Daily Wire now who want to put out an Atlas Shrugged movie, and you've had other people like Dennis Prager interviewing Craig Biddle. They seem interested in the ideas, and that's one reason to side with them and to try to knock out the Democrats, so we only have the Republicans to deal with.
See, I think of it a little bit differently, and here's why. For one, most of the Republicans, I've seen Republicans who have said that their favorite two books are the Bible and Atlas Shrugged. I mean, that's ridiculous. But beyond that, nobody is ever going to confuse Joe Biden with having my views. Somebody will confuse Donald Trump with having my views. So if they see Donald Trump and they think Donald Trump's a defender of capitalism, and that's what capitalism is, now you have the added burden of explaining that no, Donald Trump's not actually a capitalist. And that can only be complicated if we side with them or pretend that we're siding with them or any other such thing. I far prefer to show where the Republicans are dead wrong and where they're a big government party, because I don't think I'm going to win over Bernie Sanders. I could win over a young kid who supports the Republicans because he supports capitalism and thinks they do as well.
But who are you going to win them over to? Like we're dealing with a culture battle here, where we got to, at certain times of the year or certain episodes where we got to vote for a Republican or Democrat. How are you going to decide which one to vote for?
Well, I can't vote because I'm a felon, but even if I could, I don't have to, and I wouldn't have to choose one of the two parties. I could write in a candidate or vote for a third party candidate. But I just don't see the point. I'm okay, even if we accept the premise and say we have to vote for one of the two. Well, why would I just vote for Republican when even if they win, what am I getting? I mean, I've seen in my lifetime, the Republicans had the House, the Senate, and the White House. What did they do? Did they cut spending? No. Did they unleash markets? No. Did government get smaller? No.
Basically, the mechanisms of government turned against them, and they weren't able to do any of their agenda. That's part of what makes the Democrats a bigger threat to me, is that they're so much more effective at pursuing their agenda. They also have the bureaucracy on their side going along with it. So,
okay, can you name one Republican out there? I might be able to name one. So I'm going to say name three who would abolish Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the war on drugs.
Rand Paul.
That's the one I was thinking might do it.
I could also put like Thomas Massey in that category. He's a congressman. And, look, the bottom line is, as we move left, the incremental policy is not even going to be removing Social Security. It's just going to be.
Scott, you just told me a second ago that the only thing preventing a freedom agenda, you said their agenda, what I was talking about was freedom, and you said was the bureaucracy. And what I'm saying is their very views, the things that if you listen to them, they campaign on, is not the agenda that I don't know if I want to call myself an objectivist, but I think I will. I'll say a disciple of Ayn Rand would support. They're simply not for those things. I mean, I remember Donald Trump. Donald Trump came out in favor of the Kelo decision here in Connecticut, where the government takes private property for private use.
He's a real estate guy. So
no, he is, but he also supported the government forcing Apple to turn over their security secrets. He also supports paid family leave.
I mean, I'm looking at that in comparison with, I see the Democrats as old and woke as a new religion. And I'm a big proponent of momentum. It's the direction things are moving in. And it's because of that it's the new religion that's actually marching through the institutions that represents a bigger cultural threat. It would be like in the Roman Empire, spending all of our time worrying about the pagans while Christians were taking over.
Well, okay, let's go back 10 years prior to woke, prior to all the, the things that you're talking about. Did we have what you wanted then? Was the country in a good spot culturally? Or what was the economically? Was the debt much better?
There have been issues
free?
for, well over, it's like even your own book says the left has been winning for 100 years. And I think that, I don't think this of you, but I do think there's an element out there, even within the objectivist and libertarian movements, that are like, the left is won. Let's not do anything to upset them. Let's just focus on why we hate the right too. And that'll be like a
no. I would never suggest, no, I think wokeism is a disaster. And I think the policies of the left are horrible. What I think is a problem is when the left ascribes to Republicans being extreme free market supporters, for instance, because that's not true. They're just not. And I don't think that we should be accepting that premise that they are. But my very point in that the left has won over the last 100 years, even with people that are liberty-minded supporting Republicans. Supporting and siding with Republicans has accomplished nothing. It has literally accomplished nothing. It may have done some harm. And yes, it's true. Wokeism can be viewed as a religion. I got you. But is it better to have the people that actually want religion taught in schools, that actually think that the government should be in our bedrooms, that want to outlaw victimless crimes or, victimless behaviors? I just don't see it. I don't see how I can put my name next to such a thing, or what benefit it would do to me or anybody else.
It's looking at the same way that it's different to be a Christian post-Enlightenment and as they've lost cultural power. I was very anti-Christian 30, 40 years ago when I was in high school. It was like, I've seen the change in the dominance of the culture and who people are self-censoring themselves. I mean, the moralizing ninnies used to be church ladies. And, now it's all this woke environmental stuff that you have to spout. And so I just don't want to spend my time. And I just want to go back to this confusion thing for a second, because I do think that has been a type of flaw within it. It makes objectivists see Brandon as worse than Hitler, or libertarians as being the worst. And it's even a theme in Atlas Shrugged where, the people like Dagny and Hank were seen as the bad guys for continuing to sanction evil on a certain level. To a certain extent. So I just think that confusion thing itself can become, I don't want to say second-handed, but just where you're able, you're worried so much about what other people are going to think when you've got this left that thinks Ayn Rand, you, me, and everyone else for capitalism's a bigot.
Sure. And that's easily disputable unless you've got a Republican Party that acts as if they are bigots sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. And so it makes it far easier to confuse the two. But ultimately, I'm no defender of the left, and not even close. That doesn't make me de facto a defender of the right. I'm a defender of the truth as Absolutely. I can see it and as I can reason through it. And I can't see the benefit, and nobody yet has been able to point it out to me. What is the benefit of siding with the Republican Party? Whenever they're in power, they sell out. They're not even their claims don't even match up with what I would like to see implemented. So what is there to gain? I can't grasp this. I don't know what is the benefit. If I want to dispute the left, I can dispute the left, but that doesn't mean I have to then join Republicans hand in hand.
Right. You don't have to join them hand in hand. We're asking that you side with them against the Democrats and say they aren't as bad.
I'm not even necessarily saying that. My goal is to create a broader liberty movement from parts of the libertarians and Republicans and classical liberals and even, Democrats that have been mugged by reality, like Barry Weiss or the Weinsteins that have been canceled for having inappropriate views, and just coming up with a new coalition.
I'm all for. I'm all for that. And Todd Feinberg and I have been working on starting a party where, we're in the beginning stages of it, but to do pretty much exactly what you described.
Yeah,
I
and
think
it
the
doesn't even
problem
have
with
to be a
starting
party per se. It's just people getting together and saying what we're going to do to counter this woke monster.
Yeah, it could just be a movement.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think one of the problems with starting these third parties is that you're basically taking people away from the Republicans. And so there's very little chance of success here. The Democrats stick together, they're socialists, they're just this collective
Oh,
horde. And if they stick together, they're going to win
yes.
because
The
more of
premise
them.
you just put out there, though, is that it's somehow wrong to take votes away from Republicans. And I disavow that right off the bat. And secondly, especially in my state, the Republicans aren't getting elected anyways. So to take votes away from means nothing. And then finally, like I said, even when they get elected, what do? What under Republican presidents, were they vetoing spending bills left and right, or were they just driving up the debt?
I mean,
I think
there's
the
a
question
civil
is
war within the
what they're
party.
doing is what they're doing worse than what the Democrats do.
That's like asking me if I want to get punched in the face or punched in the nuts. I don't want either to happen.
But
Obviously, it's worse to
one
get punched in the nuts, but I'm not going to then go and side with the guy to punch me in the face. I'm going to fight both.
True. I mean, that's a difficult choice. I mean, but sometimes those difficult choices, such as when we're in a culture war, they need to be made. I mean,
Okay.
someone has to decide, am I going to get hit in the nuts or the face?
Yeah. Well, where are Republicans putting forth the type of culture you want?
I
In
think it's coming more
certain
from
regards, there's a respect for free speech that I accept. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's certainly
Um,
better than the left. And so that's why and then there's a certain respect for capitalism and the ideas of Ayn Rand. They listen to us, and I think that's a positive. I think the left, you get nowhere. They're just
I think
hardcore socialists, and they don't listen to anything.
there's different factions within the party. There's the old establishment guard that, yes, they are becoming more like the Democrats every day. And luckily they're, slowly being voted out of office. But,
well, the new people, though, Josh Hawley, for instance, he wants to sanction tech companies and wants to put restrictions on what they can and can't do and who they can and can't have on their platform. I don't see that as any different than the Democrats mandating the same thing.
I just see, I mean, he's one guy, but I think that,
well, Ron DeSantis said the same thing.
I mean, I think Ron DeSantis is actually trying to counter these guys, these businesses that are being under duress. And he's saying, look, I'm going to actually create a new type of thing for you to go back to the feds and say, oh, we have to relax the mandates because the governor's making us do it.
So why not just protect free speech?
There, at a certain point, you're just cheek turning, because then the businesses are like, I know who's intimidating me. I'll just go with them to make it easy.
Well,
And-
do you? Here's a question I have, honestly. So, if you could snap your fingers right now, and the Republican Party would control Congress completely, control Congress, control the White House, they had it all. Would they implement a society that's even close to the one that you want?
Not in their current
For me,
form.
the answer is not even close.
No, but I mean, it's partially because of those establishment Republicans. They're the ones that need to go. It's the Mitt Romney faction that wants to go along to get along. And these people that they invoke principles while they're caving.
Well, the new wing is Donald Trump. So if Donald Trump's war on trade, if his big government policies, hold on. The new factions of republicanism that you're talking about are the Trump Republicans. They're the MAGA Republicans. Yeah. They're anti-trade.
They don't always listen to Trump. And, I mean, honestly, there is something to be said for using trade to advance our policy. I mean, we've let them walk all over us with value-added taxes and they're hidden taxes when it's supposedly tariff-free. And I think that stuff should be negotiated. I'm for free trade in principle, but it has to be reciprocal. And
why?
Because otherwise it's cheek turning.
So shouldn't you live by your values regardless of what they do? And if a business doesn't want to deal with another country because of the taxes, shouldn't that business be free to do so or not do so? And our country shouldn't be engaging in the same type of behavior if we claim to be free?
I think it's anti-American to trade with a communist country. And so I'm all for regulations against trade with China.
Well, that seems to be a hell of a collectivist premise. I mean, that's like it's all us and all them.
I mean,
No, it's a
That's an
nation.
Rand had a
American.
similar view, but
Well,
I don't even
nations
take
are
that.
made up of individuals, and if we're going to be
Yeah.
free individuals, then we need to be able to choose who we want to
No,
associate with, regardless of what the government thinks.
No,
It's
because
more-
you're contributing to the enemy. You're giving them aid.
They're
So
not
it's
my
not-
enemy,
it's-
and I'm not contributing anything to them.
it's the
What I'm
enemy of
saying
the
is
nation.
that I ought to be free to do so. If I
would-
want to, I mean, who's going to decide? The government is the only entity that can decide such a thing. And I'll tell you what, if I'm going to take a choice between the government deciding who's going to trade with whom and a businessman deciding, I'm siding with the businessman every time.
Yeah, I just
No,
I'm not
not on
against
international
trading with
matters.
China altogether, but I have no problem with the president that is dealing with multiple national security issues, using trade as one piece of leverage to act in the best interest of the country.
Well, we can do that anywhere you want. I mean, they can use that logic to advocate any policy and say, well, we're going to use this as leverage right now. We're going to implement this short term. The bottom line is we're either people of principle who are advocating for a principled system or we aren't. And that doesn't mean, of course,
context, because there is a certain point at which, cheek turning is a principle.
Well, it sure is, but our principles are supposed to be economic liberty, individual freedom, individual rights, and the main principle on that in one sentence is the initiation of force is wrong. And if I, as a businessman, choose to make a trade with somebody in communist China, who is the United States government to initiate force against me to prevent such a trade from happening? I've initiated force against no one. So if they initiate force against me, they're violating my rights. That's a fundamental principle, and I don't see how we can get around that.
They're not initiating force against you. They're
sure they
initiating.
are. If you're
force-
depriving me
no,
of the
they're
right to
initiating
trade with
force
somebody
against
else,
China.
of course you are.
They're initiating force against China.
How?
They're
Who's-
controlling the border and not
hold on,
allowing
if goods are coming into the country and I have to pay the tax on those goods, which is what a tariff is, they're compulsorily taking money out of my pocket. How is that not initiating force against me?
But there's no money in your pocket yet.
But it's my money. I've made the trade. That could be said of the income tax also. It's not in your pocket. It's withholding from your paycheck. So it was never yours. That's a leftist argument. That's not mine. And the same principle applies.
Paycheck, so it was in your bank account.
No, well, not if it's tax withholding. No, it's
My
pre.
point is that
it was in the hands of your business.
So hold on.
So
Hold on. So the principle of initiating force is going to depend on a technicality of whether it's actually in my check or not. You're making me pay the government in order for me to make a trade with somebody. They're initiating force against me. I don't see how you can escape that conclusion.
Principles are contextual and they are subordinate to national security concerns. And I think the president should be open about what he's negotiating for. But I do think there is a place for, at least having that argument. And because I think what happened was in reality, and I get, you weren't in this, but in the objectivist movement, there was a list of people that had TDS literally. And they Trump derangement syndrome. It's putting emotions over, and it was just, they were against Trump for whatever he did. And so as a result, all of a sudden, trade and immigration became like the most important issues in the country, while they totally missed, China's authoritarianism and the woke march through the institutions, because, they kind of don't want to fight it.
Well, I think that we should be fighting all.
Good.
Let me ask you this: if we were at war with China, would that change your opinion?
The problem is what you just mentioned context. Well, here's the thing. Under what conditions are we at war with China? Why are we at war with them? What was the cause?
If we were in a military
war. I got it, but we were at a war we were at a war because we invaded Iraq. We were at war with Vietnam because we sent troops into there. So is the war justified? Are we actually defending liberty, or are we just defending some interest that we think is necessary? And it would entirely depend.
I'm putting forth a hypothetical. So if we were in a justified shooting war with China, would you say that you should be allowed to trade with them, with people?
Yes, I would. Yes, I would say so. Yes.
Right.
Now, let me just say now. This is why it's a problematic question, because there may be, destroyers in the ocean. There might be things blocking my ability to trade. So then am I going to pick up arms against the U.S. military so that I can make it through blockades and whatnot, or aircraft carriers? So, I mean, there's a lot of context there. But in principle, I would say absolutely I should still be able to trade with them.
Okay, a more general question then, because I noticed you asking on Twitter whether having a government is necessary.
Yes.
Do you think that a government has a role to play in social systems, or should we just get rid of government altogether?
I always have. I'm at the point now where I think that Rand's criticisms of anarcho-capitalism are spot on. I don't think she's wrong. I have all the same objections. I've never been a Rothbardian. However, I'm at the point now where I'm saying, okay, that hasn't been tried. What we have tried clearly hasn't worked. The Constitution of the United States has clearly not prevented the growth of government. By the time the ink was dry on it, they were already putting forth the plan for the National Bank, which violated the Constitution. Adams put forth the Alien and Sedition Acts, violated the Constitution. Jefferson, the Louisiana Purchase, violated the Constitution. So if the founding fathers of the country couldn't even be limited by the document, then what chance do we have today? And because of that, I'm leaning now towards more of a Rothbardian, David Friedman position, not because I'm convinced that that is the savior, but I'm convinced that everything else has been tried and hasn't worked.
Yeah. Well, I'm a momentum guy. So I think that they have a lot of energy right now. A lot of people are identifying as ANCAPs, and not only that, but we can push in their direction and just pull up when we get government as small as we want it.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, I think law is necessary. Yes, and I think that law is necessary to protect liberties. The form in which that takes, I'm no longer quite as certain as I once was.
Sure.
I don't think anyone's certain.
Well, that's great. Well, any big things coming up on the Feinberg show we should know about? You got any appearances coming up?
Well, next Wednesday, Stephen Hicks from the Atlas Society will be on.
Oh, great. He's great.
And so I'm looking forward to that. And other than that, there be way too soon for this podcast to reach anyone that would listen.
Well, good. Well, I want to really thank you for joining us. I know we got a little contentious with politics, but it seems like we're all on the same side. We just have different ways of best getting there.
Like I said, I'd rather be disagreed with than echoed. I appreciate
right.
the discussion, guys. It was great.
Good. William, any final thoughts?
Sure. Just thank you for coming on. I think you're genuinely changing yourself for the better. And we are certainly addressing the tough questions. So I'm glad to see you chewing on them as well. And I hope to talk to you again sometime.
I hope so too. I'd love to come back on, guys. It's been great.
Great. Maybe we'll get you for a specific issue next time.
All right.
So great. Well, this has been the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig, and we will see you next time.